And that is definitely one of the reasons why I'm doing this. That's why I want to be able to talk about masculinity in an environment where everybody thinks that all masculinity is bad, or a man talking about his own manhood is some sort of a contribution to white male patriarchy or something. And that, unfortunately, that toxic-y thing, that toxic left-wing mentality is growing. And so here we are in this harbor having this conversation, and it's important to have females in this harbor too. It's important to have gay people talking on the Mang Dojo. It's important to have gender non-binary people, but everyone needs to be sane. And that's why I asked you that question. Is it okay for us to even say masculinity anymore? Because there's a subsection of the population that doesn't think it's okay.
That subsection is causing a lot of harm, isn't it? Causing a lot of harm because whether you say the word masculinity or not, most men aspire to a certain bunch of masculine ideals. You want to grow up, you want to find a partner, you want to have a good job and take care of your partner. All of these things are societal norms, and they're male norms. And there's also male ways of thinking, which are brilliant. If everyone thought the same, we'd have problems, right? Men's brains and women's brains are different. We solve problems differently. We go through life differently.
What is going on, everyone? Tis Miyanovich, and I welcome you to the Mang Dojo, the place where we process the raw struggles of men in an unprecedented paradigm. There is something inside of you that wants you to be more than what you are. But there also may be something inside of you that wants you to go down. And for some of us, that means going down for good. So, remove your ego, drop your bullshit, become vulnerable, and step into the dojo, mate. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another sparkly, fantastic edition of the Mang Dojo. Thanks for stepping in. Today we have another fantastic guest. Today's guest is Dr. Stephanie Leite. And I'm going to read you a small little blurb from her website about her credentials. Dr. Leite received her doctorate in psychology from the University of Hartford, having previously achieved a master's from Boston University and a BA from Carleton College. She currently practices in the states of Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, and nationwide as a clinical and forensic psychologist and in the arena of threat assessment and management. She provides training and testimony nationwide. Stephanie is a licensed psychologist in the states of Connecticut, New York, Vermont, and Massachusetts. So you can check out all you need to check out Stephanie's website, Forensic Intelligence LLC. And all you have to do is basically Google her name, and that should come up for you right proper. The thing that I wanted to say today is that I met Stephanie at a conference, the Virginia Threat Assessment Conference. Many of you may know this about me. Some of you may not, that I am involved in the world of firearms, and that doesn't just mean the usage and rights associated with firearms. It means also the negative things that happen with firearms. And one of the negative things that we see in society today that come from firearms is the mass shooting and the school shooting. And I have been lucky because of my involvement in the firearms world. I have been able to meet and become friends with some of the leading subject matter experts in what is known as threat assessment and student or behavioral threat assessment. So what does that mean? My particular area of focus is school shootings, and there have been scientific systems that have been devised to mitigate or stop school shootings from happening. Now, this is an unscientific way for me to say this, and while Dr. Stephanie and other people like John Van Driel, who is about to be on the podcast, these people would describe things differently from me. I have a unique role. I really don't have to be held down by a lot of the constraints that these professionals are held down by when I describe issues related to school shootings, mass shootings, threat assessment systems, etc. And why I'm saying that is because it is really important that I speak in your language, the language of the listener, not the language of these subject matter experts, so that people can understand something. And that is, there are systems that are used in this country in schools that mitigate school shootings. But I am going to say that differently. I am going to say that fucking flat out, school shootings get stopped all the time. And that's a very important statement to make. School shootings get stopped all the time, which is both a great thing and a scary thing, because the school shootings that you see that end up happening are the ones that don't get stopped. It is my opinion, and it is the opinion of others, like John Van Driel, that if it weren't for threat assessment systems in schools, you'd likely see a 2x or a 3x increase in school shootings. And that's why it's scary. But it is also important to say that's why threat assessment really matters, because it fucking works. And it works well when it's done properly. So Dr. Stephanie is involved in this world of threat assessment. She's involved in this world of dealing with young humans and their psychology. She's involved in this world quite heavily. And she has definitely one of the most unique minds that I've come across in the threat assessment space. So what does this all have to do with the Mang Dojo? This is what it has to do with us. Males are perpetrating these school shootings almost entirely. And so understanding adolescent male psychology or male psychology is extraordinarily important in this regard. And so this has implications not just for the threat assessment school shootings reality, but for men in general, because the same things that are affecting these school shooters are also affecting other young men, are affecting men in general. So it's important for us to see how these issues are landing in different kinds of adolescent males or different kinds of males, and then how those things are translating into behaviors, you see. So this is why it's extraordinarily important to have a guest like Dr. Stephanie on, so we can talk about what's going on with maleness. In 2025, what is going on with maleness? We need to discuss that, because it is not the same thing as what was going on with maleness 25, 50, 100 years ago. There's a new paradigm now, and it's much more challenging. It's more challenging for males in high school. It's more challenging for males in college. It's more challenging for middle-aged men, as we've discussed. So these are the reasons why it's important to get perspectives of subject matter experts like Dr. Stephanie and other experts like John Van Driel, who's going to be coming up here soon. This will be one of the areas that the dojo focuses on pretty consistently, which is understanding the phenomenon of school shootings and mass shootings and how that relates to maleness. And we need a nuanced understanding of this to be effective. So because a lot of what is going on out there in the world is not sufficient in terms of understanding this nuance, and certainly not in the media, and certainly not in the political world. So this is an essential understanding, in my opinion, about what is going on with males currently. So without further ado, I would like to bring you in on my conversation with Dr. Stephanie Leite. And as always, step into the dojo, man.
So I have an alternate view on things, as I do for most things. I consider it to be a choice and an honor to do this work. And I mean that, like the choice part. And there's this woman, Laura Vandernoot Lipsky, who writes, and she has this great TED Talk about trauma and about being a custodian of your trauma. It's like, I've been doing this work for so long. I have accepted that this is part of my job, is to absorb other people's trauma and then rework it into something useful, right? I have, it's not a surprise that I'm going to be bombasted with the most horrible things, because that's my choice. And because there's choice in it, it's not foisted on me. I'm able to titrate it. I'm able to say, overcooked, going to have a fewer cases. I mean, if you work for a school system, you don't have a choice, right? I'm independent, and I can choose to make sure that I have time off, but even more so that I can wallow around in this trauma and then help other people get better, right? It's my choice, and I'm gonna face it down. And one day maybe I won't be able to do it, and then I can make another choice. I'll make granola.
Dr. Stephanie's granola. That would be awesome.
I make very good granola.
Trauma granola, like trauma granola. That could become very popular, perhaps, with the way that the humans seem to be getting more and more complex and troubled. Your trauma granola might end up being the thing that saves the day.
It Could be. You never know.
So I wanted to have you on the new podcast, the Mang Dojo, because we're dealing with men's issues and issues of all things men, positive and negative. And the saying is that men hurt others, but men are also hurting. So I wanted to talk to you today because I respect your intellect and I love the way that you don't look at everything the way that everybody else does. And we've had conversations in the past about issues with relative to school shootings and mass shootings. And this is one of the things that you do in your practice. So, and we briefly touched on the importance of sexual validation for teenagers, but specifically for teenage males, for adolescent males. So I guess the first question I wanted to ask you today is the desire for sexual validation for males and adolescent males and females, is that a normal thing? And how much power do you think that has inside of the adolescent world? So is it normal? And is there a healthy version of it? And how important would you say that is in your mind to young teenagers?
Well, obviously, sex is the thing that drives the world. But what is sexual validation? Like, so when you say sexual validation, what do you mean?
So in the classic sense, of course, we're probably going to have to just stay kind of binary at first. So I'd say males and females, although in the opinion of the podcast and the opinion of myself, there are other expressions that are non-binary expressions that are also in play. But I think it's important to just start with maybe more strict male, female. So sexual validation would be if I'm a teenager and I have all of these feelings about the opposite sex, and there's attraction and there's a social environment that my energy is like exuding itself outward towards females, and that there are some females that are exuding it back at me, and I am being validated in my maleness, right? So I like females in this new and exciting way. And there are some females that are going, you're in the game. I like you, or I have these feelings about you. That would be the rough way that I would start validation.
Okay. So I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think about it a lot. I think all the different threads of my career weave towards this in some way. I like to start thinking about it from an evolutionary standpoint. So basically, why are we here on this planet? Well, with my big brain, I'd like to think I'm here to make the world better. But really, I'm here to pass on my genes to the next generation, right? That's the purpose of my corporal being on the planet. So that involves sex. You have to have sex in order to pass on your genes. So it is innately human to want to have sex and to be attracted to someone who will give you the pleasure and the companionship and the progeny that comes from sex, right? It's basic. And I think for our kids, one of the big challenges that we're facing now, as in always, is that they don't know what they're doing and they don't know what they're talking about. And they put together what I call their sexual blueprint based on what they see from their family, what they see from their friends, what they see on TV, what they see on Instagram and on the free porn channels, which of course a lot of those things are not reality based. And then they're trying to put together a construct of what being a sexual being is. And it's not always in sync with reality, which can mess up that sexual validation that is important for everybody because they're getting bad information. The roadmap they're being given is poor. And some of our modern problems come from that.
And so you think that although the issue with teens and seeking out sexual information, sexual validation, has always been fraught with challenge, that we are in a time that is worse, perhaps worse than it's ever been because of technology, et cetera. Would you say that's what you feel and what?
For sure. They're extra roadblocks. And then a lot of the kids had COVID, which interfered with their psychosocial development as well.
When I heard that Asian cultures were really struggling, I think that information started to come back at us about 15 years ago, that the correlation between spending a lot of time online for males, Asian males in certain countries, was so they're on time online and time alone is increasing, and their social skills and their skills relative to intermingling with females were decreasing, and it was a real problem. When I first heard that, I was like, what the hell is that? Like, is that really happening? And now it's happening here, in one way or another. So the validation, so I guess when you bring up evolution, there's two things I think about. There's the biological drive that you bring up, and then there's the contemporary social expression of, like, in a high school, right? So when we're all engaging in that in high school, no one is like, I can't wait to have a baby, or this is about me having a baby, or I can't wait to pass on my genes. So the underlying biological reality is hidden, as much of it is for us, but we're developing social constructs and habits and social playgrounds around these drives. And, like I've had the benefit of, I went to public school until 7th grade, and then I went to an elite private school starting in 8th grade. And those were two separate expressions of the sexual validation reality. The one in the public school I found was much more hierarchical and strict, and much more driven by what you would consider like meathead alpha teenage boy energy. The one in the private school was still there, but there were less people getting slammed into lockers in the private school, if that's one way of putting it. There was less meatball alpha influence in the second reality. Yet both realities had the game, and it's troublesome if you walk into an arena, which perhaps you think the facade, it's a school, you think it's about school, but when you get in the social reality, it's about, there's a lot of sexual validation is like the king, or social validation. I don't know, Lex, maybe I should ask you this question. Where's like the line between general social validation from your peers and sexual validation from your peers as a teenager? Is there really a difference, or do you think it's all sex?
It's all sex all the time. That is how it goes. I had a similar experience to you. I went to private school starting in 5th grade, so had the chance to see both worlds as well. But, okay, so teenagers, social equals sex, whether it's actual having sex. And we know that kids now are having less sex than they were in the past, which could be a good thing, but they're having a higher level of sexual expression through all of the media that are available to them. So there is no doubt that having the positive regard, which in many ways is sexual, of your peers is a critical aspect of success in high school, no matter where you are. And if you are not perceived as a sexual being, then you have lower status.
And how do we think that adolescence, or how did we, you and I, when we were teenagers, or how are teenagers today registering the value system in the game, right? I guess, would you say there's a subconscious aspect of it and a conscious aspect of it? Let me start with this. Do you think that registers inside of teenagers, whether they're thinking about it or consciously working with it or not? Is it hitting them regardless?
So I'm not sure that teenagers use their brains much, right? We have evidence that they don't use their frontal lobes. You can put teenagers in MRI machines, and you can see there are parts of their brains that they literally aren't using, that are sort of critical for everyone else. I should have waited until you weren't drinking to say that. But it's true. The whole frontal lobe, the whole putting things together, and the forward thinking is not really a part of their brain. But there's no doubt that the social structure is harsh for them. My experiences in high school were terrible because I was a late bloomer, shall we say. And so I was at the bottom of the totem pole for sure. And at the same time, you could see the struggles of those people who exuded sexuality. And maybe it was the wrong kind of sexuality, right? When I was a kid, coming out was very, very hard. It's still hard, but it was very, very, very hard. And a lot of the people who masqueraded as virile, successful men were and able to grow up to be virile, successful men, but in a single sex rather than a heterosexual relationship, right? But that wasn't okay then. So I imagine the pain of all of that as well.
it's quite complex. It seems like it's simple. But I think about when I came into high school, so I went like up and down and up in terms of status. So here's what happened with me. Like taller than everybody, athletic, right? And so and in the gifted courses, right, in school. So I went like up from the beginning, was up and very high. And then some bad things happened in my family around the time I was 12 or 13. Plus, that's when puberty really starts to take a hold. And I was traumatized at this point, and probably traumatized earlier than that, but traumatized and became depressed. And then my depression just dragged me down. And so I ended up gaining weight, like stress eating and stuff like that. So, and some eating disorder. So I probably gained 30 pounds at that age, 35, like the worst time where you could do it. And my status changed as a result of this. So the worst time that you could put on a whole bunch of body fat, I put on a whole bunch of body fat. And then I slowed in my growing, and everybody kind of caught up to me for a while. So I wasn't taller than everybody. I gained a lot of weight. My knees started to hurt more because I was growing a little bit and my weight was up. And so I stopped playing sports for a year, and I went down the ladder or down the hierarchy, and I ate shit. I got a chance to, like, I hung out with the nerds more, the jocks less. And I really got a taste of girls that used to be like, oh my God, he's so hot or whatever. Were like, ew. Like that was their reaction to me. It was awful, but it was really enlightening. And I ended up coming out of that, and my things got better. My knees got better. I lost weight. I went back up. And by the time I was at the end of high school, I was captain of 2 sports. I was way taller than everybody, all that stuff. So I got a chance to eat the shit sandwiches, and I got a chance to, like, you know, ride on the whatevers, ride the skies. It was like great. How awful it was to be in that valley and go to school every day. So this obviously has a major impact on what's happening with kids every day, and it's complex. And I hear things from friends that are ladies that were like, teenage girls are the worst, right? Catty and backstabby and social aggression. And of course I can say boys can be terrible, very terrible. But so what happens when all of this tension and all of these issues land inside of a boy, and it has an extreme effect on him, and it goes somewhere crazy. Let's just use that term. It just goes somewhere crazy, because this is one of the reasons why you and I know one another, is because over the past 25 years, many times this little game is landing inside of certain males, and they are perseverating upon this issue, and it is ending up in either wanting to engage in targeted violence, or it ends up in the person engaging in targeted violence, a school shooting, a mass shooting. What do you think happens there in that process, and what kind of person is more susceptible to this shit, to eating shit sandwiches in this game that most teenagers are not if they're eating shit sandwiches because the girls aren't validating them, it's not going to end up violent. But it's starting to happen that it does. What is happening? What kind of person do you think? I know we can't profile, but give me your thoughts on how in the hell this happens.
I love talking with you because I always have so many thoughts after your questions. I wish I could speak in 4 streams at once, but
It's probably because I talk for 10 minutes straight, and basically I'm covering so much shit, and then I could be asking you 20 questions based on what I said. But
so I'm going to start by saying that my theory of threat assessment of what goes wrong with people can be distilled into 2 words right now, which are dignity and purpose. And I have those words on my business card because I think they're so important. So if we just start there, and everything you just said, the shit sandwich, everything is about loss of dignity and loss of purpose. And those are the 2 things that people need to succeed, no matter how old they are, no matter what developmental stage they are. That's what people need. And you can, if you think about it, it can get deep and it's applicable to everyone. But we're applying it right now to young men who are learning about their sexuality. And I think we could chunk it out into two groups of people. You're thinking about the people who are sexually unsuccessful, right? And they're eating the sandwich. They're not successful because the job of teenagers is to figure out who they are in the world and then move on to the next stage, which is pairing up and having kids, if we're living in Erickson land, where I do live most of the time. So they have to figure out who they are to move on to the next developmental stage. And if who they are is a loser who doesn't get any of the girls, that's really, really tough. And it's hard to see where your place is in the world if you're not able to achieve that basic thing. So you have one group of people who are the bottom feeders, shall we say, who perhaps want to seek revenge against women. And there's increasing research and thought about that type of person who wants to engage in violence against women because of status issues, right? That's group one. Group two are those people who would fall into the category of domestic abusers, of intimate partner violence, of coercive control. Those people who see the solution to this problem of sexual achievement as control. If I can control women and keep them under my thumb, then I get to be sexually validated and sexually successful because they will do what I say. So those groups also go on to targeted violence. And when we look at people who have committed an act of targeted violence, depending on who's doing the number crunching, between like 40 and 70% of them have a history of misogyny or partner abuse. That's a big number. And I think it encompasses both of those categories.
So that data kind of extends out of high school a little bit, right? Because we're basically talking mass shooters.
But I see tons of domestic violence in high schools too. And I see a lot of people trying to control their partners in high school as well. And it's where that blueprint is set. That's why I came up with the construct of a blueprint, because you have these young girls who don't know that that kind of relationship is bad. Because it's their first relationship, and then their blueprint gets set.
I'll share an observation that I've had, and it was reinforced this morning when I was reviewing the paper that you shared with me. And this is just my observation, right? This is backed by a paper, right? So a lot of these young males that see violence as the solution to this issue of insecurity and control, they're obviously highly insecure people. Probably, arguably, you might say, Randy, yeah, but all teenagers are insecure. Sure, I agree with that. All humans are insecure. I would agree with that one way or another. But these young males that end up on the behavioral spectrum, or maybe they end up not pulling off a targeted act, right? To me, they scream a very high level of insecurity, and they don't like it. And they're seeking to remedy that. What I find interesting is, if I look at most of the people that were high alphas in high school, who were maybe meatheads or in the public school, would be at the top of the hierarchy. Someone who looked like others were emulating their power, their abilities, right? They were setting kind of the standard of the sexual validation game in public school, or perhaps private school. That after some time, you can see that they too had a ridiculous amount of insecurity. So both the nerds who weren't getting sexually validated, they're odd ducks, but so are the alphas in the top of the hierarchy are also odd ducks, because the vast majority of the people that I was around and observed in terms of males were pretty laid back, moderate people with some moderate insecurities, but they were sexually validated by their girlfriends and nobody was making a big deal out of it. There wasn't like, if there's always probably going to be issues of control and insecurity, perhaps from both partners, right? But what I find interesting is they're both the bullies, or the high meathead alphas, are odd ducks, and these supersonic undervalidated nerds who might end up being school shooters are odd ducks. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally makes sense. And it makes sense with what we know about development and social achievement. So, for example, we know that when you were taller, you were higher status, right? When you were taller than everyone. We know that kids who develop sooner, right, develop those adult characteristics for men of being tall and broader chested and deeper voiced earlier, achieve social success earlier, but it ends up bottoming out for them. And the theory is that it's because when you develop earlier, or if you're super beautiful, if you are good to look at, it seems like a really good thing because in high school, it gets you that social success that you want. But if that's all you got, if that's what you're building your personality on, if that's your main hat, that is a pretty thin hat to wear. That is a pretty, good looks come and go. And that is not very substantive. So to think that you are going to go forward, that's where the insecurity for those meatheads comes from. They know that their success is a thin veneer of extremely superficial and not important characteristics. But that is what they have hung their success on because that is what society is giving them because we value that meatheadness, right? More than whereas the geeks at the bottom, they have to develop that sense of purpose. They have to develop that sense of worth. And that's why so many movies get made about high school reunions where the tables are flipped, right? Because it's reality. That's what really happens.
Would you say that the whole insecurity of the high adolescent alpha, it would have that insecurity would have to be subconscious or deeper than, because typically in the mentalities of these people, there is no such thing, right? It's like they're completely oblivious to how unstable the whole, I'm the captain of the football team and I'm the hottest one in the school and I rule the roost. How insecure that is. I don't think, like you said, teenagers aren't really using their brain. So I would imagine that a lot of this psychological force has to be, or perhaps a psychological realization that this is not a long-term solution for them, for their insecurity. Or I'm sorry, it would have to be more subconscious. So let's take that to evolutionary psychology. What's the benefit for Homo sapiens to have in your group a high alpha who's broad-chested and tall and powerful early and leading early in life, yet is a maximum ball of insecurity? What does that serve for the Homo sapien groups that are trying to survive the ancestral environment? Why the hell would that be a thing?
My guess is that we have surpassed in some ways our biological history and our evolutionary history. So back in the day, being broad-chested and maturing early would be good. That would be good seed to spread around because you want broad-chested, strong people to help the community survive. But now we live in a world where it's not necessary to lift things to do well. And the people who do the best are the ones with the biggest brains and who are capable of solving the important problems that we have today in society. So that's the traditionally desirable characteristics have become less desirable. And we see a lot of suicide, right? We see a lot of suicide in those groups of people who were successful and then not successful, especially when it's related to sports.
The part of perhaps male power that can easily go away. Like you said, people rest their hat on it. And then when that paradigm doesn't deliver to them anymore, they don't know how to make an adjustment into something else that would give them dignity and purpose.
Yeah, our high schools are just a hotbed, no matter where you are in school, of focus on sports. So those kids who do well in sports get the most laudits in the school everywhere. And it's different sports in different parts of the country. And then they go to college, right? And it turns out just because you were the best football player or soccer player in your little tiny high school in the middle of wherever does not mean you're going to play for a D1 school. And suddenly your whole personality is out the window. And you have to go to a new place without that personality and be successful in that new place without the cloak that treated you so well throughout high school. And it's really hard.
The whole validation game. So some of these mass shooters, or those that would emulate or attempt to emulate, seem to develop an attitude that the female aspect of the human race is on the planet, and their purpose is to validate males, right? That's their job. You're supposed to be doing this, right? And so some of these, I don't think in any of the cases I've reviewed, I would call any of the school shooters, I don't think one of them fit into an alpha category. I don't remember seeing one of them being a high performing and accomplished teen athlete. I don't recall seeing one, and it's been dozens and dozens. So they're falling into the more youth cry, emo, outcast. They're falling into, if we can use these kinds of like stereotypes, they're falling more into that realm. But some of them are developing or do develop this concept that, and this you see in the general incel rebellion and incel reality online, which is females are supposed to be on the planet to validate me, and they're not doing that. And hence, here's my plan of action or the way I'm going to live my life. Is that a narcissistic trait? Would you say that comes, so there's a highly insecure person, but of course we have insecurity and narcissism together. Is this something that's coming from a individual narcissistic trait? Because frankly, the reason I'm asking this is I don't remember anyone in any high school advertising the sexual validation game as something strict. I don't remember anyone saying outwardly, you're a piece of shit, you're the greatest, this is what women are supposed to do. Like, no one's advertising that. It's much more, honestly, if you look at the whole thing, it sucks, but it's kind of generally mild. It isn't this extreme game of people getting slammed into lockers all day and people walking down the hall and the jocks with the Letterman jacket on getting underwear thrown at them. Like, that's not happening. It's pretty mild. Where in the minds of these school shooters, right? And, where are they developing these notions? Because from reviewing all the cases I've reviewed, it's not like they were being taught it at home either. They probably weren't being taught anything. And I think I'll say one more thing and I'll let you go is, it's not like it's being hardcore modeled either. Like, it's there and it's annoying and it sucks, but it's not being modeled as this extreme game of you're a piece of shit if you don't have a girlfriend. And it's not modeled that way. It's more modeled in a more mild way. So why are these cats being impacted by this? And then it's turning into this ape shit phenomenon inside of their brain. Is it narcissism? What would you think it is?
So I'll table the narcissism thing for a second and think
sure.
about it. It is modeled. It's modeled in our society. It's completely systemic. It's everywhere. I mean, have you watched a teen movie for the last whenever? All the media that they consume has a portrayal of men as dominant and women less so. What was it, the Bledsoe test or the test of, there was some, I can't come up with the name, but there was a test for movies to see, do two women have a meaningful conversation that isn't about men or fashion or dieting in the movie? And most movies, the answer is no. Right? So this image of women being there as subservient is something that is completely ingrained in our society. And I brought up porn before, which is one of my recent obsessions, especially when it intersects with this issue of dangerousness and mass shooters and in high school. Pornography is available for the kids nowadays in a way that it wasn't for us, because it's free and you can get it on your phone in a millisecond if you want to. Whereas for us, that one Playboy would get passed around and everyone would look at it and the whole school saw the one Playboy that Johnny found under his dad's workbench, right? And would be like, ooh, what's this? But now you can get extremely graphic, extremely violent, extremely misogynist porn. And the way that the flow has worked with pornography and keywords, right? So now you type in a keyword to get the specific kind of porn you want. It's getting more violent and more specific. So it's definitely not a two-way street. So that is another way that kids are being educated. And you brought up Incel, right? On the Incel forums, there are tons of discussion about pornography. It's a terrible blueprint, and it shows an inappropriate and unachievable sexual paradigm. No one has a body like a porn star except a porn star. So anyone who watches porn is going to say, my body doesn't look like that, therefore I am inferior. Women don't react like they do in porn in real life. So anyone who tries out those moves and they don't work is going to feel inferior. It's just a recipe for absolute disaster. And it also, to make it even worse, it can be like a substitute for actual social contact. So we were talking about people who spend too much time online. We're all in our houses. People aren't socially engaged. You throw an additional fake social thing like porn where you can follow a particular actress, right? And then you feel like you have a relationship with that person, but it's not real. That makes things even worse. And then the chances of being able to achieve that sexual validation is going to be totally diminished. So back to narcissism, if we're talking about like real narcissism, like the veneer on the top is covering up the inner goo that feels that it's absolutely useless, sure, it could be. It could be. And I keep on saying hats, not just because you like hats, but I like hats too. One of the hats that kids can wear now is that of school shooter. There are many possible options. I had a case recently where there was a guy who was, it was trial. He was on the stand. He said, well, maybe I should try being a cowboy instead of a shooter, right? It's like, it's an option. You can be a jock, you can be a nerd, you can be a theater tech person, you can be a school shooter. And if you're not successful at anything, school shooter is one of the easiest things to accomplish. It's not complicated.
I was surprised in working with one of my friends locally who was in charge. So we're outside of Asheville, and it's, the blue bubble of Asheville, and then it's all red area and not a lot of money. So it's rural towns with not a lot of money. Not a much threat assessment going on in these school districts. But there is 7 schools in one district. And he was in charge of a barely existent threat assessment mechanism for 7 schools. And that's a whole discussion. It's a mess. But he did his due diligence the best he could when he was there. And, without him really betraying like HIPAA and FERPA and things like that, we would have generalized discussions about shit he was dealing with. And one of them over and over again that I would hear was how easily these kids use the threat of blowing up the school or shooting up the school. It's fucking constant, and they don't even, it's nothing for them. They're so desensitized, and it's such a regular part of life now that they can use it as a threat just to get attention the way that we used to do all kinds of stupid shit 20, 30, 40 years ago to get attention for ourselves, to be edgy. For them, it's just being edgy. It's not really connected to the national trauma whatsoever. It's just a way to just get attention.
Yeah, it's just a hat. So what happens when we overreact and we say, oh, you're being edgy, get out of school, do homeschool, be on Zoom school until we decide whether or not you really are a threat because you said something out of anger. It really behooves us to recognize that it's part of the vernacular now. It's like we used to say things that now kids wouldn't say at all, right? So we would say like gay was a slam and now kids are more aware that that's not really appropriate. And maybe in 25 years, they would realize that threatening to shoot up the school is not appropriate, but we're not there yet. We're deep into it being easy to roll off the lips.
In terms of like the extreme things that are coming with the accessibility to the internet, porn, different ways of viewing females, or viewing reality, but viewing females. It seems to me there are certain people that are really affected by that, access to that kind of stuff, and it really does impact them. And then there are certain kids that shit really doesn't affect them that much. They're kind of very similar to how we were, right? So, and when I said earlier, like, there's no modeling, yeah, I know there's always modeling of these sorts of things, but I just mean that seemingly even today, most kids are not, like, however the validation game is running in them, it's pretty mild. And their reaction to the internet and the access to all this horse shit is not really that bad. But I'm not in the middle of it, right? So that's just my take. Is it affecting everyone? This new reality, it's affecting everyone in terms of their viewpoints, the way they express themselves sexually, viewpoints of the opposite sex or the sex of their sexual interest, their sensitivity, their ability to communicate. Do you think it's having a real broad scale effect, not just on the most psychologically vulnerable?
I do. I really, 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 really do. And I see it in my own kids and my kids' peers. I see it in the kids that I work with. And I see it in everyone. Clearly, it's only a very small percentage that's minuscule of people who are going to go on and commit an act of targeted violence. Right? The numbers seem big, but they're actually rather low. But there's just no doubt that things are harder for teenagers today than they were before, because the modeling is more pervasive, because it is out there not only just on TV and stuff, but it's in chat rooms, and it's in the porn and other media streams, all the Instagram, TikTok reels, and all of that kind of stuff, which they absorb constantly. Plus, they're not having any practice. They're not going out and practicing and meeting people. And everyone is much more socially isolated than we were back in the day.
And I see it in my kids too. We homeschool, but we're definitely not isolating them. Social environments and learning centers and being around other humans and learning and playing and all of that is top priority for us. As a matter of fact, I'm the lead person in terms of making sure that they get plenty of opportunities. It's never, when you homeschool, it's never the same as being jammed into a sardine can with 1,200 kids 5 days a week and and sports and all of the possibilities that are there. But I make sure, and my wife does too, but all of us make sure that we our social thing is so important. But even though it is, I see it in my kids, their social dopamine, let's call it their social dopamine and their sexual dopamine. It's not very strong. It's like it gets dissipated into the digital world. Or the other thing that I see is, I think that, we'll call it like the sexual vectors, or these like sexual actions that teenagers would take. And sexual as in just general sexual, not necessarily like physical contact, but like, let's say you're of the opposite sex and I'm going to proposition you, or I'm going to punch you on the arm because I have a light punch on the arm because I have a crush on you, or what pass a note, or the shit we used to do, whatever those little actions were. My kids don't have those little actions happening as much to them. And it's like I have 2 girls. So it's like, as girls, their DNA is waiting. Their growth is waiting for the stimulus. Like, they can't grow without it. They can't develop sexually without it. They need other people getting interested in them and passing notes and texting them or calling them. And they don't have that going on as much. And it's like they're waiting. That's what I see. And I just wonder if that's also happening with boys, that they are now so confused that they're waiting. And everyone's like, you remember in the dance when some people would just be up against the wall because we were scared and insecure and we're waiting, right? I feel like that's kind of where the world is now. Everybody's waiting, and we are so getting screwed over by the fact that the digital reality is taking away that sexual dopamine or that social dopamine. You see the same thing?
Yeah, and the the weighting, the bar of what is socially acceptable has become even more delineated than it was in the past because of the social media. So my kids will say, "Oh, those jeans are terrible," or ratchet, as they would say, and those jeans are banging. And to me, they look like jeans. Yet, if someone wears the not good jeans to school, it's social suicide because no one would want to take a picture with them, and they're not Instagram ready because they're wearing the wrong pair of jeans. And it becomes so just leveled out with what is currently socially acceptable and isn't. And instead of getting that sexual validation that you were talking about from people walking down the hallway and smacking into you, you're getting it from how many likes you get or the comments that people are putting on your posts.